Hello there and welcome to another Hero Arts video. It's Michelle Short here and today I have a see-through window card to share with you. So let's get started. I'm starting off by stamping the beautiful Wisteria HeroScape bundle. So there are 4 layers to the flowers. There are some hummingbirds, some butterflies, some beautiful sentiments, and then in the bundle you also get the coordinating frame cuts. So I'm starting off by taking the first layer of the wisteria and I'm going to stamp that down onto some Deluxe smooth white cardstock. Because I'm die cutting this piece out, it doesn't matter where I stamp it on the cardstock. Ordinarily I probably would just stamp it at the top of an A2 panel. That's what I tend to stamp onto, but in this case I'm just going to do it on the side of it and then I can use the rest of that cardstock for something else. So I'm starting off by inking up this first layer with Kiwi core ink. Inking that up really well, and I'm using the mini misty here so that I can stamp it a few times if I need to. So I'm just pressing down that stamp, and although actually I didn't get a bad impression at all, it was pretty good. I've got into the habit really of double stamping, so I'm just going to stamp that again. And then because I'm going to layer up a lot of different layers onto this, well there's 4, there's not a huge amount, but there is a lot of layering going on. I do just want to heat set the images in between, just so that the layers stay nice and crisp and they don't kind of blend into each other. So I've taken the second layer of the leaves and I'm just placing that down, trying to sort of line it up as best as possible. And then for this one, I'm going to ink it up with Fresh Lawn core ink. So just inking that up really well and then I can press that down. And then again for this layer I did do that twice. So I inked it up again and then pressed it down again. I did heat in between that layer as well, but I'm not showing it for all of the layers because obviously you don't need to see me do that for each one, but I did do that for each one. Then next, for the petals of the flowers themselves, I'm stamping these with Orchid core ink. And I did end up stamping this layer about 3 times, so the orchid colour did end up quite dark, but I still think it does look quite pretty. And then for the last layer, I'm just going to line that up as well. I did find with this stamp it was pretty easy to line up, although I do think because of the nature of wisteria, I think you can get away with if it's not perfectly lined up, which is always helpful for me. So I'm inking up this layer with Grape juice core ink. And although ordinarily there's quite a big difference between the orchid and the grape juice, because I stamped that orchid multiple times, it did mean that there wasn't such a big gap in between the 2 shades. So that's the wisteria all stamped. I think it looks really pretty. I'm then taking the coordinating frame cuts and I'm going to line this one up along the bottom, and what's really good is it just cuts the bottom part of the image and doesn't actually cut the top, so you can use that in lots of different ways. I am just going to cut it across with my guillotine at LA today, but it does mean that you have a few more different possibilities for using this set. So I held that down with some low tack tape, run that through my die cutting machine, and for the time being I'm just going to cut those 2 sides off and just keep that piece intact at the top. I then want to stamp the hummingbirds, and at this point I didn't know if I was going to use both of them or just one, so I ended up actually stamping them both kind of separate. If I'd realised that I was going to use them both, I would have just stamped them both at the same time. So for the bottom layer of the hummingbirds, I'm using the Paradise core ink. Again, inking that up really well and stamping that down. And again, I did heat set that ink in between, just because it takes some time to dry, and it does dry out really nice and smooth, but I find that if you heat it in between, like I said, you get more of a crisper image. So for the top layer, I'm using Bermuda core ink. And I just think these hummingbirds are so pretty. I think you could stamp them in lots of different colours. And then I just did the same thing for the other hummingbird. I'm then taking the coordinating frame cuts in the set, placing that over the top, holding it down with some low tack tape and running that through my die cutting machine. Next, I want to stamp a sentiment from the set, so I'm using the Scripty Thank You I'm stamping that onto some more Deluxe smooth white cardstock, and I'm using Intens-ified black ink for that. And again, I do stamp that twice just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression. And a great thing with this set again is that there are coordinating dies for the two scripty sentiments. So I'm just die cutting that out. I then want to create a panel to go inside of the card. So I'm taking some more of the Paradise Core ink and I'm blending that onto a panel of Deluxe Smooth White cardstock. This panel is just slightly smaller than an A2 size. So I'm focusing most of the colour towards the top and just kind of fading it down to white at the bottom. I'm then taking an A2 size white card base, so this is a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I'm taking the Elegant Window Fancy die and I'm just placing that down on the front of the card base. I'm bringing in the wisteria here so that I can see how far down I want the window to be, and actually I think it's quite nice having the wisteria overlap quite a bit of that window, so I'm just focusing it up towards the top of that card base. I run that through my die cutting machine and now it's cut out on the front panel. I'm adding some double-sided adhesive tape onto the back, just covering all of those edges. I can remove the backing off of that tape, and then I'm taking a piece of acetate card panel and I'm going to stick that on the back. I've then cut another panel of that window, this time just slightly smaller, so that I can adhere it onto the back, and that's going to cover up that adhesive and also the acetate on the back as well, and it just looks nice and finished from the inside. So now I've got my window piece. I have cut the top of that wisteria piece down, and then I've added some thin foam tape just along the top. I didn't want you to be able to see it from the inside of the card, so that kind of covers it up. I've then die cut another two of the thank you sentiment just from some white cardstock, and I'm just using them to layer this piece up. I didn't want to add foam tape onto the back of it, but I did still want a little bit of dimension, so I'm just using the precision glue. This is the XL version, which is the slightly bigger tube, and I'm just using that to adhere them together so I've got a bit of dimension on that sentiment. I then can just place that on top. I'm not going to adhere that down just yet. I'm going to take the hummingbirds and I've added some more thin foam tape onto the back of those, and then I can just place them down. I am using the tweezers here just so that I can kind of hover them in place, see where I want them to kind of go before I actually stick those down. And then I did cut another of the two hummingbirds from some more white cardstock. And I'm going to use those for the inside so that it's going to cover that foam tape on the back. But before I do that, I'm just going to stick that sentiment down. So I'm just going to add a small amount of that precision glue just along that kind of window pane there. And then I can stick that down. And that's going to mean that you don't see that adhesive or anything like that on the inside. So from the inside, you can see the pieces obviously from the wisteria and also the thank you sentiment, but they look okay because there's no adhesive on them, but you can see that foam tape on the hummingbirds. So I'm just adding some tape runner adhesive onto the back of those hummingbirds, and then I can stick those down and you're not going to be able to see that foam tape. It just neatens everything up from the inside. I've then got that panel that I added the Paradise ink onto. I'm adding some tape runner adhesive onto the back of that, and then I can add that onto the inside of the card, so that when you look through the window you see a little bit of sky kind of peeking through. So just trying to make sure that is as straight as possible, and then I can press that down. And then I've got my window card all completed. I really like how it looks. You can kind of see a little bit of that Paradise ink from the front, but it's not kind of too in your face. And then I would write a message towards the bottom of that panel there on the inside of the card. I think it's just something a little bit different with that window, and the acetate just kind of reinforces it. And again, it does look quite neat from the inside as well. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Hero Arts blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.